Hi, fellow educators. Becca Dodmead here. We're going to be having an educational session on how to transition from traditional classroom to online learning. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So the differences in traditional classroom and online learning are as one might expect. Traditional classroom is easier to connect with the student, real-time discussion with the student, with the entire class, obviously facilitator to student discussion. And then something that really came up in my literature searches was the ability to doubt clear. So if a student is, for example, struggling with ABG interpretation, they might not have every question cleared up, but if there's a way for that student to resolve their educational gap quickly, then doing so in the traditional classroom is going to be the most likely. The other thing we're discussing is online learning, right? So with online learning, there is just massive amounts of flexibility. The ability also to connect with individuals in other geographic locations. This goes for the instructor as well as the learner. For example, you might have an instructor in California and a student in Florida, and even if they are in a synchronous class, they still have some flexibility on when they have, for example, meetings during office hours. So something that I found interesting as I was doing the literature review and searches, I found that even as far back as 10 years ago, much before the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a lot of literature about the various ways that online learning can touch the learner. So there's learner to content, learner to instructor, learner to learner, as well as the asynchronous versus synchronous. So just to recap, learner to content would be perhaps completing a computer-based module in one's own time. Learner to instructor could be anything from having a Zoom call to a phone call to email. The communications that would happen between the learner and the facilitator to try to increase learning, close those educational gaps. Learner to learner is a huge umbrella. This could be a group project, it could be discussion boards, which is very big in online learning. And then, asynchronous versus synchronous. Obviously, these two are kind of at the opposite ends of a spectrum, if you will. Asynchronous means I can go in on my timeline, even if nobody else is in the class at the same time, whereas synchronous, you have to be there at the same time, whether it's 9 o'clock Pacific time and 12 o'clock Eastern time. It's the same for anybody in that class. I just found it very interesting that even though it seems so prominent now, this really isn't a new discussion. So something that came up a good bit in the literature searches and then also in my capstone is equity. Not just diversity and inclusion, equity specifically with regard to online learning is how do we ensure everyone has the same access or the same fair shot at learning. And so what I found is that students that have barriers to consistent internet activity are found to have lower e-learning proficiency. So if financially they can't afford to consistently have internet, then obviously that sets an individual up to have issues. But then the other thing is, if there's not great internet provider, that can be an issue as well. They don't have transportation to go to a library. So there's really a lot of factors in equity and accessibility to online learning. So adapting the classroom to online learning is a multi-layer topic, right? The curriculum may be the same. To go back to the example I gave with the ABG interpretation, if you have an undergraduate nursing student, they need to understand ABG interpretation, whether they're in an online environment or a traditional classroom. So the challenge becomes, how do you tap into that knowledge and close that educational gap through online learning? And so something that I found in the literature review is Dirks's adult learning theory. So essentially, the soul must be nurtured in order for critical thinking to occur. I found this very profound because the ability to connect with another human through the computer is difficult. And so this takes a lot of tenacity and skill on part of the educator. And so I think that this is something to really keep in mind as we navigate taking a traditional course and converting it to online, because we have to make sure that we're connecting human to human so that that critical thinking can occur in an environment of nurturing. So this is a whiteboard video on adapting with technology.
Exceptional learning. Distance learning offers the learner the most flexibility. Online learning was being utilized prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, but quickly became a necessity as the virus spread across the world in 2020. The question for the nurse educator becomes, how do we give the online learner the same amount of attention and also engage them without seeing them in person? Relying on technology is a given for online learning, but the nurse educator can also utilize technology in order to deliver engaging content, such as whiteboard videos, visual aids, or group learning activities that can be completed via teleconferencing.
So with that, I will thank you for your time. And the one thing I will leave you all with is we have a ton of technology at our fingertips. We have access to information as quick as we could possibly want it. But the one thing that remains is, without connecting human to human, learning won't occur. So again, it really falls on us to put forth that effort and try to find ways to connect with the student. And one thing that I found very meaningful in my capstone courses was that there's a recommendation to take a chart and write little tidbits about your students down. It might be that a student has a new baby and can only access the course at half an hour increments. It could be that they're consistently having issues with APA. That would be me as a graduate student. So I just want to encourage everyone to remember the human component and trying to connect via technology. Thank you.